This Sunday was supposed to be our children's Sabbath and Confirmation Sunday. While they are not canceled, but like so many other things just put on pause, I am grieving their loss today. In the litany of losses that we are all experiencing now, this one is particularly getting to me. Perhaps because my calling is primarily one with our young people, I am really mourning the loss of one of the Sundays where they are in leadership in this place. On this day, they are supposed to be the center and celebration of our worship service. Instead, I am here all alone. On a Sunday when we are focusing on the last sentence of our church's compact, strengthened by this bond to act in Christian concern for the welfare of all people, it feels really strange to be alone. If you listened to this morning's children's time, this kind of feels church-ish. Even though I know rationally that right now the best thing that I can do out of concern for the welfare of all people is to be alone, I really miss you. The celebration of confirmation, much like our new member joinings, is an experience of hope and of joy for all of us. Those days affirm that the opportunities and support that this church community offers compels others to want to fully join us in our mission. It's also our time to make promises to one another, to offer each other love, support, and care. That we will strengthen our bonds through times of wonder and of joy, but also in times of struggle and pain and uncertainty. We are a community with equal shares in rights and responsibilities, including in our care for one another. I think that I can say with some certainty that we at UCG all agree that we want strong bonds of care with one another, and that we desire to be a supportive body for one another. And I think that I can also say that act in Christian concern part will draw feelings of comfort for some of you and shudders of uneasiness for others of you. Certainly, there are acts in this world that are done in the name of Christian concern that I too could do without. Acts of conversion or intimidation that are simply abuse masquerading as concern. Acts that we here would not ever call Christian or concerning someone's well-being. So what do we at UCG, who according to our all-church survey, identify as 57% Christian and 22% agnostic or atheist, mean when we say we act out of Christian concern for the welfare of all people? What is different or illustrative about specifically Christian concern that warranted its specific addition into our compact? In an interview with PBS, Helmut Koester, a professor of New Testament studies at Harvard Divinity School, was asked, why was the early Christian community something that people wanted to join? He answered, I think only because at least certain parts of the early Christian mission were intent on creating a new community. That only for that reason was this movement successful. Because of its intention of creating a new community. Now, what does that mean? He goes on to name 2 different levels of this new community. One was certainly that the message that was preached promised spiritual gifts to people that went beyond everyday existence. a life experience in the future which would be liberated from sickness and disease, and from poverty, and from individual isolation. In this movement, there was a future for the individual. And the message of the possibility for a human being to be related to something that was beyond the powers of the world as it was certainly a great attraction. But that alone would not have been enough for Christianity to succeed, he believes. Because in spite of all the glories of the Roman Empire, people lived in a world with great inequity. There was great poverty on one hand and immense wealth in the hands of a very few people. There was sickness and disease, and there was no public health services, and doctors were very expensive. You don't say. Relatable a bit, don't you think? Now, Rome reinforced that inequality. Rome was a very strict hierarchical system in which the empire was at the pinnacle. The empire was God, all the way up, and then all the blessings of the world would come down from on high to the people down low. The emperor was seen as the only conduit to the divine world, and if you're at the bottom of that pyramid, not a whole lot of things were trickling down to you. At this time, slavery was somewhat diminished but continued to exist, and poverty was simply commonplace. And into that world came this new Christian community, described by Paul as one that begins with a baptismal bond, which says that in Christian community, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither enslaved or free or male or female. It's not just a new community, it's a brand new social order. It's a community that not only welcomes you as you are, but makes you equal with all the other members of that community. It's a community that gives every person, even women, even the enslaved, personal dignity and status. Koester also said in that interview that in the early Christian community, the commandment to love was decisive. I had never heard it put that way before, and I really liked that word, decisive, for our act of love. In other words, caring for each other was and is central of importance. In that world, people are taken out of isolation. Hungry people can be fed at a table with a place set for them. If they're sick, a leader would lay hands and touch them to heal them. Widows were not left on the street, but brought in and cared for as sacred sisters of the church. In conclusion, he says one should not see the success of early Christianity simply on the level of this great religious message. One has to also see it as a consistent and very well thought out establishment of institutions that served the community. Now, I think we at UCG have a great religious message, a great compact that acts as our compass. But perhaps most importantly, we care for each other. And through those strong bonds, we are able to be consistent and well thought out in the way that we serve the needs of our community. UCG is a place where we are willing and even encouraged to look out at the troubles of the world and see its great need. But like Marion Wright Edelman said, we can struggle with it, and we have the possibility to change it. That we can be willing to recognize that our intellectual and material gifts that we share as a community can bring the privilege and the responsibility of sharing them. And that service, as she said, is just the rent that we pay for living. But together, we can make that rent affordable. As Andy said in his prayers this morning, this month is designated for mental health awareness. I'm wearing my form of the green ribbon today. As you probably have read, many around the world are raising the concern that the second pandemic we will face will be one of mental health needs. The consequences of this abrupt and frightening and seemingly endless change that has come unbidden into our lives will be real and significant. Anxiety, abuse, substance use, depression, trauma, and more are being felt on a wide scale, perhaps never seen before, and are rippling through our society. And especially with those for whom this was already a reality in their lives. Great resources in the mental health world remind us to stay connected, even if it's just virtual, to stick to a routine, to practice acts of gratitude. And these are all wonderful, wonderful methods to maintain some degree of mental health. But what I think we as a church community will have to come to terms with is that when we return to this place, we will not be the same people who last passed through those doors. We will need to remember to be gentle with one another, to remember that everyone's comfort level will not be the same, that everyone has suffered differently, but that we are all suffering. Perhaps most of all, we need to remember to allow one another to just not be okay, to be able to ask for help or for space, or for assistance in forming new groups, for support, or for grieving together. We need to remember that this, above all, is a sanctuary. And all who enter, no matter where they are or who they are on their mental health journey, are welcome here, even distantly. And they will receive our love and support. Bessel A. Vanderkolk, a psychiatrist whose work with those suffering from trauma is renowned, said this: "Being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important act of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives." I trust in our strong bonds with one another. And we have been able to create a support system for one another even in this time apart, and I don't believe that it's just going to fall apart. That first Sunday we gather here, however, that will be known. We just can't be sure what church is going to look like. And that's really hard. But in the same way that we are finding new ways to do the work of the church, I know that we will find new ways to be in community, to feel safe again with one another. So, what do we at UCG mean when we say that strengthened by our bonds with one another, we seek to act in Christian concern for the welfare of all people? Well, I can't tell you that. I'm just me. I can't tell you what it means for all of us or for you as an individual. But I can tell you what I think, and I can ask you to think deeply about what it means for you, and perhaps to share that with someone in our UCG community. For me, this phrase means that we care deeply for one another, and that distinctions that are important in other places just aren't here. Those with social status and those with none, those with wealth and those with none, those who live comfortably in the gender binary and those for whom their pronoun hasn't even been invented yet, those whose minds can easily just take things as they come, and those whose minds become paralyzed with stress. We are all valued equally here. I also think that it means as a church body, we will always act to protect the most vulnerable. Whether in our traditional acts of protest and of witness and of service, or in acts of mask making and physical distancing. I believe that it means that when there are stones that could be thrown, instead we'll find a way to use them to build a bridge. And that we'll always find room for one more at the table, and that every person will have a chance to be unmuted on Zoom. It means that for me, I know that UCG will rise to each occasion, and by facing opportunities in change together, find our strong bonds, our woven threads pulled even tighter together. That because our bonds are strong, like that early church, we will express our Christian concern in the ways of being community that refuse to see each other as expendable, as ranked, or in any other manner that a decisively loved, equal member of our sacred community. Your blessing and benediction today comes from our last confirmation class of 2018. Each confirmand chose a line from our compact and took it as their own and illustrated it in a way that reflected its meaning to them. And so today, as we strengthen our bonds with one another and express our Christian concern for each other's welfare, may the leadership of our youth bless you with our church compact. On this day, while we wait for the time when this room again can fling its doors open in welcome, in physical welcome, for all who want to continue their journey alongside of ours. Amen.
for joining us at the United Church of Gainesville today. To learn more about who we are and what we believe and to support our ministry, please visit ucgainesville.org.